Give us a little background on your company as well.
Okay, sure. My name is CatherineTobiasinsky and I'm head of retail for EC Harris, and my role is a global role. EC Harris is going to be 100 years old in 2011, and so the pedigree of the company has been looking at property, looking at construction, starting off very much from a kind of cost management, project management perspective, but now in these times it deals with all sorts of issues and services connected with property. So my role is to help our retailer clients, who are a lot of the big sort of international players, expand their store networks, expand their distribution centre networks, to help grow their business and deliver better performance. So we focus. We have 46 offices globally. And the major markets for us are UK, Europe, Asia, China, and Middle East. So I'm here to help grow and accelerate our business here, our retail business here in China.
Wonderful. If we look at the different retailers in China, could you tell us a little bit about specific challenges that occur in China and compare a little bit the differences between the Chinese market, let's say the Western markets, for example?
Yeah, no problem. Okay, so EC Harris's main client, our biggest client base are the food retailers, and what's absolutely noticeable about the China market, and this is very true of all the emerging markets in India, Russia, is that actually the Chinese consumer still wants to buy their food through markets and through kiosks. They're not the sort of modern retailing format that we're very, very used to in the UK and Europe or the US is not the actual format favoured by the Chinese consumer. So there has to be a very strong education to encourage the Chinese consumer to travel to the typical hypermarket or store, and you know, with a society that's not very car-based. And that also kind of creates another challenge because those retailers tend to be in standalone stores, edge-of-town stores. So straight away you have a challenge for the international retailer having to kind of adapt its format, adapt its locational strategy, and also very much adapt its retailing strategy. It's got to the sort of whole market fresh concept has got to be absolutely paramount. So you notice in Chinese supermarkets you get a lot of fish tanks and fresh fish, and the fish are killed. Sounds very grim, but killed right in front of you. And that is absolutely for the Chinese consumer sort of paramount in terms of of wanting to go to the store and buy their food there. Whereas in the sort of Western ideal is as far away from that as possible. I think the other interesting dynamic around food retailing is actually the food supermarkets cannot always offer a good price advantage. Sometimes it is actually cheaper to buy your food in the markets, but the big driver that's changed habits has been the whole food safety and the food hygiene. Is that there's the Chinese consumer it becomes more sophisticated and expects a higher level of standard with its food. Therefore, it's now trusting these new brands more so than it would have done in the past. So you have a couple of trends there driving the Chinese consumers. That's a very, very specific look at the food retailing market. But you have some parallels in the other categories as well, in terms of just a different way of doing business here versus the more established European models.
If we look at let me call it the traditional trade, the traditional structure of how markets operate, and we compare that to the let's call it modern trade, such as maybe Carrefour. If you compare both of these and you look at the strengths and also their weaknesses. Could you give us a little bit about what is an advantage of the traditional trade and what is an advantage of maybe the modern trade?
Okay, in terms of Chinese retailers and an international retailer coming in with a modern format, you mean?
Yes, not just necessarily Chinese retail, but the
Yeah.
traditional market in that sense.
Yes.
In comparison with the modern market as a modern retailer.
Okay, in China.
Yes.
Yeah.
What is the attractiveness to consumers? What draws consumers to a traditional market? What makes that attractive?
Okay.
And what makes the modern retail attractive?
Okay, so I mean, it's the same principle. There's one principle that stays the same wherever you go, and it's location and convenience. So typically, you will for food shopping, you will go and buy your food where is most convenient for you, closest to your home or closest to your work, depending on where you spend most time. And so the kind of the attractiveness of a traditional market is clearly, you go there, you know where it is, it's very, very local. Whereas because of and then in terms of the modern retailing formats, they have to go to where they can find the right space to accommodate their store format. So there you have one immediate advantage that would attract people, kind of retain people to the traditional format. I think then it's about price, so it's location then price. So if people perceive to be getting better value, and the Chinese consumer is very, very price conscious, then maybe they would travel a little bit further than they would normally do to get that better price. It becomes financially worthwhile to do that. And I think it's about sort of freshness and about getting the availability of what they want. The modern retailing format has an advantage because not only can they kind of secure, as I've talked about already, the sort of food safety standards, but they can also present a much wider assortment of produce. For example, they can present things they fly in from another part of the country, or even produce that's not locally available. So you can kind of give the consumer more choice for equivalent or even sometimes better value. So those I think are the key dynamics. What's interesting in more mature markets is the trend is there's a trend the other way, is that they want to go back to traditional markets because they've kind of some nostalgia, and because of it's become the modern retailing experience has become too bland and too uniform. So it's quite interesting that as one part of the world moves to modern retailing from the other part of the world wants to move away from it. So it's quite a good balance overall, I think.
Could you give us a little bit insight on the consumer shopping experience feel?
Mm-hmm.
And again, maybe we can compare that for the modern markets and the traditional markets. Is there a tendency where we would even go so far to say that modern markets are trying to replicate the shopping experience feel from traditional markets?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think you make a very, very good point that you need to although you want to try and attract the typical consumer to distinct advantages in terms of a modern retailing format, you want to keep some things very familiar and very safe, and so absolutely there's a definite trend in terms of recreating a sense of how that consumer typically wants to buy. So a lot of Westerners complain around the Chinese retailing formats are very, very confused and chaotic, and a lot of kind of looks like kind of market trading. But actually, to the Chinese consumer, that's how they've always shopped and how they've always been brought up. So to move into a very clinical environment is alien to them, and isn't part of their shopping experience. So there's been an absolute trend to try and recreate the elements that make it familiar enough to feel sort of secure and trusted, in order for them to make a financial transaction. So yeah, I think it's definitely a balance between trying to keep the right things the same and then change the things that I mean, obviously the big problem with more traditional formats is the hygiene and the food safety, but present a better alternative on those more negative features.
If we're looking at the developments China has gone through,
Mm-hmm.
and we're looking also at tier 2 and tier 3 and tier 4 cities, the developments that are happening in retail there now,
Mm.
how do you see the future and the importance of in the near future, let's say tier 3, in the further future, maybe tier 4? And what is the need for local adaptation in these cities as well?
Yeah, no, that's another very, very good question. I mean, my observations, particularly in the tier 1 and tier 2 cities, is that the trend has been very much into the more sort of Western, more modern formats, is that consumers are absolutely wanting. I mean, essentially they travel a lot more. They're much more internationalised, and you know, there's TV, there's the internet. They're developing ideals that are more or less international standards. In the tier sort of 3, 4, 5s, even you see a lot of you see a lot of sort of all this waving. In the other tier cities, you see still you know, a very, very local sort of market. And the interesting thing, I think, for retailers who are entering that space is they still need to adapt their proposition, their formats to cater for local taste. So there is a lot of not to make the mistake of keeping the same what works in tier 1 and 2s in 3, 4 and 5 tier cities, absolutely.